Some motorcycles are so confusing, so mismatched, or just plain weird that dealers still can't get rid of them. We're talking brand new bikes practically being given away because no one wants them. In this countdown, we're looking at 14 Japanese motorcycles that totally missed the mark. From space-age cruisers to sport bikes with identity crises, these machines had the specs, the hype, and the brand power, yet somehow flopped harder than a high side at a track day. Whether they were too strange, too safe, or trying too hard to be everything at once, these bikes prove that even the best brands can drop the ball. Let's dive into these motorcycles that just won't sell, no matter how low the price goes. Number 14, Yamaha XSR900. The Yamaha XSR900, because someone at Yamaha said, "What if vintage but also fast?" Born from Yamaha's racing DNA, this bike blends neo-retro styling with modern performance. Powered by an 847cc inline-3 engine, pushing out 115 horsepower and 64 kilograms-feet of torque. Basically, it's the MT09 in a tweed jacket. At just 429 pounds, it's light enough to flick through traffic without breaking a sweat. Great for the daily commute or that one time you pretended you were on a track. Suspension? You get an inverted telescopic fork up front and a monoshock out back. Translation: smooth ride even if you hit every pothole because you're too busy looking cool. Dual front discs and a single rear disc handle braking duties. Because stopping is important, especially when you're trying to impress at the cafe. Design-wise, Yamaha tried to make it retro-modern, but reactions were mixed. Classic bike lovers thought it looked like a vintage bike got lost in a sci-fi movie. Sport bike fans said, "Cool, but where's the rest of it?" So yeah, stuck in the uncanny valley of motorcycle design. With a price tag of $11,500, it didn't exactly scream affordable fun, especially when more focused or actually retro bikes cost less. Turns out, retro styling is a tough crowd. And Yamaha's follow-up? Let's just say it didn't exactly go viral in a good way. Number 13, Honda CB650R. Meet the Honda CB650R, a bike that said, "Let's do retro, but make it subtle, maybe too subtle." Designed to blend classic aesthetics with modern performance, it came equipped with a 648cc inline-4 engine, producing 94 horsepower and 47 kilograms of torque. Sounds decent on paper, until you ride it and realize paper might have been the best place for that performance to stay. The inline-4 delivered buttery smooth power, sure, but it also delivered the kind of excitement you'd expect from a polite handshake. In a class where bikes like the Yamaha MT-07 are out here throwing elbows with raw torque and aggression, the CB650R felt more like the quiet guy in the corner of the group chat. Nice? Yes. Memorable? Not really. Styling-wise, it tried to split the difference between retro and modern, which mostly resulted in people asking, "Wait, what is it trying to be again?" It wasn't nostalgic enough for the vintage crowd, and it wasn't aggressive enough for the sport bike fans. Basically, it had the vibe of a reboot no one asked for. Ergonomically, the semi-sporty riding position made long rides feel like a slow descent into back soreness. The suspension was stiff enough for commuting, but too firm for relaxed rides, kind of like a couch that looks great but feels like plywood. At 445 kilograms, it was relatively light, but not light enough to give it an edge. Brakes, dual front discs, and a single rear. Functional, but again, nothing to write home about. With a price tag of $9,200, it walked into a very crowded party where everyone else either brought more horsepower or more personality. So it quietly took a seat in the corner while buyers gravitated toward bikes with clear identities. Number 12. Kawasaki W800. The Kawasaki W800 is what happens when you really miss the 60s but also want to get to work on time. Meant to channel the spirit of vintage British motorcycles without the oil leaks or existential maintenance crises, the W800 leaned hard into the nostalgia aesthetic. Round headlamp? Check. Teardrop tank? Check. Spoked wheels and chrome for days? Double check. It's basically a museum piece with a warranty. Under the retro shell lives a 773cc air-cooled parallel twin engine making 48 horsepower and 44 watt the yell-beft of torque. Translation, it'll cruise just fine as long as your definition of cruise doesn't include urgency. At 495 lbs, it's manageable, especially in city traffic where no one's trying to win a race, hopefully. Suspension is classic in form and function, a telescopic fork up front and twin shocks out back. Comfortably old school, if a bit floaty when pushed. Braking? One front disc and a rear drum, brake. Yes, a drum, because nothing says commitment to the bit like vintage braking technology. It's not bad, just retro in more ways than one. But here's where things got awkward. The price. At $9,100, buyers looked at the spec sheet and said, wait, all that money for this? The styling nailed the assignment, but the performance didn't show up to class. It wasn't a bad bike, just priced like it thought it was cooler than it actually was. So despite the vibe and the craftsmanship, the W800 ended up as more of a showroom decoration than a sales hit. Number 11, Suzuki SV650X. The Suzuki SV650X is what happens when someone at Suzuki looked at the ultra-practical SV650X and said, what if we gave it clip-ons and called it a cafe racer? Based on the rock-solid SV650 platform, the X variant tried to mix retro cafe styling with commuter sensibility. It was like putting racing stripes on a sensible sedan. Cool in theory, confusing in execution. Power comes from a 645cc V-twin engine, delivering 75 horsepower and 47 lb-ft of torque. Reliable, smooth, and proven, this engine has been Suzuki's mid-range MVP for years. At 435 lbs, the bike is light, nimble, and great for weaving through traffic or doing your best weekend warrior impression. The suspension setup is standard fare, telescopic forks up front and a link-type rear, offering decent comfort and control for daily riding. Braking's handled by dual front discs and a single rear, solid enough for stop-and-go life or the occasional spirited corner. So what went wrong? Well, despite its strong bones, the SV650X landed in the no-man's land of motorcycle identity. Too sporty-looking for commuters, not sporty enough for sport bike fans, and not retro enough for cafe purists. It was a vibe, but no one could quite tell what vibe it was going for. At $7,900, it wasn't outrageously priced, but for a bike that looked fast and felt practical, it confused more buyers than it convinced. In the end, trying to dress up a commuter as a racer just didn't resonate. The SV650X wasn't a bad bike, it just had an identity crisis in a market that doesn't do well with mixed signals. Number 10, Kawasaki Ninja 650. The name Ninja screams speed, precision, and backroad domination. So when Kawasaki dropped the Ninja 650, everyone expected a baby supersport ready to throw hands. What they got instead? A chill, well-mannered commuter in a tracksuit, powered by a 649cc parallel twin engine pushing 67 horsepower and 46 lb-ft of torque. The Ninja 650 delivers smooth, linear power, perfect for the daily grind and weekend getaways. It's approachable, friendly, and at $8,200 new, clearly aimed at riders looking for versatility over aggression. But here's the twist. While it looked like it was ready to scare off with its bigger, badder siblings, the ride told a different story. This was less track day weapon and more comfortable urban ninja. The upright riding position and slightly rear set pegs created a compromise that worked, but didn't wow. The suspension? Adequate for commuting, but it won't impress anyone hunting apexes. Braking setup, dual front discs, and a rear single was solid but uninspiring under pressure. At 426 lbs, it had the agility to dance through traffic, but lacked the sharpness the Ninja badge promised. So what went wrong? The Ninja 650 fell into the classic middle child trap, not sporty enough for the sport crowd, not comfy enough for touring fans. It wore the Ninja name proudly, but under the fairings, it was more mellow than mean. And when a bike tries to be everything, sometimes it ends up being not quite enough of anything. Up next, a case where even performance couldn't save the day. Suzuki, you're up. Number 9, Suzuki Hayabusa. Once the undisputed king of speed, the Suzuki Hayabusa didn't just break records. It redefined what fast meant. It was the bike your parents warned you about. The one whispered about at bike nights, the Land Rocket. And even in its third generation, it still packs a brutal punch. With a 1340cc inline-4 engine pumping out 187 horsepower and 110 lb of torque, the Busa launches from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds, like it's late for a fight. Triple-digit speeds? It eats those for breakfast. On paper, it's still a beast. No one's arguing that. But here's the thing, the world's moved on. Speed alone doesn't cut it anymore. Riders now want power and practicality and comfort, and that's where the Hayabusa starts to feel, well, like a legend past its prime. Weighing in at a hefty 586 twice, it's built for long, open highways, not tight urban streets. At low speeds, it's more elephant than eagle. The suspension, designed for high-speed stability, feels clunky and stiff when you're not pushing warp speed. And while the dual front discs and single rear provide serious stopping power, quick maneuvers are not this bike's strong suit. It's a missile, but only if you have a runway. Then there's the price tag, $18,500 to start, plus premium insurance and maintenance costs that'll make your wallet cry. For a machine that's less practical and more purpose-built, that's a steep ask, especially when modern bikes are offering high performance with everyday usability baked in. The Hayabusa is still a thrill, a flex, a statement, a legacy. But in today's world of do-it-all machines, its narrow focus makes it feel like a relic from the speed wars of yesterday. Number 8, Honda NM4 Voltus. The Honda NM4 Voltus looked like it rolled straight out of an anime and accidentally wandered into a dealership. Futuristic? Absolutely. Practical? Well, that depends on how often you ride in a dystopian sci-fi film. This was Honda's boldest swing at blending commuter usability with Blade Runner aesthetics, and the result was one of the most polarizing bikes in recent memory. With its stretched-out bodywork, low-slung stance, and scooter meets cruiser silhouette, the Voltus left riders scratching their heads. Was it a cruiser, a maxi scooter, a Batcycle prototype? Even Honda seemed unsure, and that identity crisis made it tough for the bike to find its tribe. Underneath the drama was a 670cc parallel twin, making 47 horsepower and 44 lb of torque, paired with a dual-clutch automatic transmission. Smooth and beginner-friendly? Sure. Engaging? Not really. Riders craving a visceral connection with their machine were left feeling like passengers on a theme park ride. The seat height was a very approachable 25.6 inches, but the riding position with forward controls and high bars felt more form than function. Long rides quickly became a test of endurance, not comfort. And at 570 slopes, the Voltus wasn't exactly nimble. Plus, for all its space-age styling, it lacked onboard storage, a baffling omission for something that looked like it should transform into a luggage pod. And then there was the price, $11,999. That placed it above plenty of more traditional cruisers that offered better comfort, better resale, and fewer identity issues. The Voltus had style, no doubt, but its style didn't translate to substance for most riders. In the end, the NM4 Voltus wasn't a bad bike. It was just ahead of its time in the weirdest possible way. And sometimes being too different is the fastest way to get left behind. Next up, a modern sport tourer from Kawasaki with the specs to win, but somehow still missed the mark. Number 7, Kawasaki Vulcan S. The Kawasaki Vulcan S showed up to the cruiser scene wearing sport bike DNA and a sensible smile. Marketed as the cruiser for everyone, it promised comfort, performance, and approachability, all in one sleek, modern package. But in trying to be everything to everyone, it risked not quite being enough for anyone. Powered by the same 649cc parallel twin engine from the Ninja 650, the Vulcan S churns out 61 horsepower and 46 lb of torque. It's smooth, efficient, and surprisingly peppy, perfect for city rides and light weekend fun. At 498, it's heavy enough to feel planted, but light enough to flick through traffic without dragging its boots. Suspension is handled by telescopic forks up front and a rear monoshock. Comfortable, balanced, and tuned more for daily rides than long-haul touring. Brakes? One disc up front and one out back, enough to get the job done, but not exactly confidence-inspiring during hard stops. The problem? Cruiser fans wanted burly V-twins and low-end torque. What they got was a whisper-quiet, high-revving parallel twin that felt more commuter than cruiser. The Vulcan S looked the part, but under the surface, it was still wearing a Ninja badge. That mismatch left die-hard cruiser fans cold and sport bike riders confused. To its credit, the Ergo Fit system was genius. Adjustable bars, pegs, and seat options meant nearly anyone could find a comfortable setup. But comfort alone isn't enough when the vibe feels off. At $7,399, it sat in a tempting price bracket until buyers realized a little more cash could land them a used Harley with more bark, bite, and bad boy image. In the end, the Vulcan S was well-built, smartly engineered, and easy to ride. But in the world of cruisers, soul sometimes beats sense, and this one just didn't roar loud enough. Number 6. Yamaha FJ09. The Yamaha FJ09 wanted to be your everything bike. Part sport, part tour, all value. Built on the lively MT09 platform, it packed an 847cc inline triple with 115 horsepower and 65 lb-feet of torque. It had the numbers, the promise, and just enough practicality to tempt daily riders who didn't want to go full sport bike. At just under $500,000, the FJ09 was light on its feet, and its adjustable suspension, front forks, and rear monoshock offered a decent middle ground between plush and playful. Dual front discs and a rear disc gave it reliable stopping power. On paper, a win. In practice, not quite. Here's the rub. The engine was spicy, maybe too spicy for touring. That raw MT09 DNA meant aggressive throttle response and an edge that didn't pair well with long-distance comfort. The seat? Firm. The windscreen? Basically decorative. And the ergonomics? Sort of upright, but still just awkward enough to turn a highway stretch into a shoulder workout. At $10,490, the FJ09 aimed to hit the sweet spot in the sport touring market. But in trying to be both fun and functional, it didn't fully deliver either. Riders wanted plush long-haul comfort or razor-sharp handling, not this in-between experiment. When your sport tourer is too sporty to tour and too tame to thrill, it lands in that awkward middle lane. And next up, a bike that tried to do the same thing but with more engine, more plastic, and still not enough purpose. Number 5. Suzuki GSX-S1000F. The Suzuki GSX-S1000F looked like it meant business. A liter-class inline-4 churning out 148 horsepower and 78 foot of torque, lifted straight from the GSX-R parts bin. It had the numbers, the fairings, and the performance to back up the hype. This was Suzuki's answer to the "I want a fast bike that doesn't ruin my back" crowd. With a semi-aggressive fairing and a $13,149 price tag, the GSX-S1000F positioned itself as a premium sport tourer, fast, capable, and allegedly comfortable. The riding position was more upright than a pure sport bike, but still leaned forward enough to keep you guessing. Comfort for long rides? Better than a GSX-R, sure, but not quite what you'd call plush. The problem? It had no clear identity. Too tame for hardcore sport riders, too aggressive and stiff for casual touring folks. It wasn't a canyon carver or a comfy highway cruiser. It was a bike in search of a personality. Handling was decent, but the weight and riding dynamics made it feel more like a quick commuter than a proper sport machine. And the styling? Functional but forgettable. It had that corporate fast look, sharp angles without real aggression. It looked like it wanted to race, but only on lunch breaks. In the end, the GSX-S1000F delivered strong specs but failed to click with either camp. It was fast but not fun enough, comfortable but not cozy, another bike that tried to live in two worlds and ended up ghosted by both. And if that felt like too much bike with too little payoff, The next one tried to win hearts by being way too little from the start. Number 4. Honda Grom. The Honda Grom was never supposed to be serious, and that's exactly why people loved it. A tiny 125cc city ripper with just 9 horsepower and 8 feet of torque, the Grom had the energy of a caffeinated puppy on 2 wheels. Weighing only 227 ohms and priced at $3,809, it was small, cheap, and a blast in urban environments. Parking it was easier than finding a charging port for your phone. It became a cult favorite, especially among new riders and anyone who thought motorcycles should be fun first, fast second. But as time went on, and as newer versions rolled out, the original Grom started to show its age. No digital dash, no upgraded lighting, and brakes that felt more decorative than dependable. Meanwhile, competitors and even newer Groms were coming out with better tech, better ride quality, and just more. That quirky, minimalist charm, it started feeling more like budget cuts than intentional design. Even die-hard fans began to admit it lacked the versatility to do more than hop around town. Comfort was fine for 5 miles. After that, the low upright seating and tiny frame reminded you this bike wasn't built for anything resembling a long ride. The fun was real, but so were the limitations. The Grom still has its fans, and it still makes sense in tight city streets. But for riders looking for more than just novelty on 2 wheels, it's been eclipsed by small bikes that do more while still keeping things fun. And when small and playful isn't enough anymore? Well, next up is a bike that went full easy mode, but forgot to be interesting. Number 3. Honda CTX-700. The Honda CTX-700 was built for comfort, convenience, and chill vibes. It came with a 670cc parallels twin engine making 48 horsepower and 44 ft of torque, paired with Honda's dual-clutch automatic transmission. No clutch, no shifting, no problem. Unless you're the kind of rider who actually likes riding. At $7,000, the CTX-700 aimed at commuters and casual riders who wanted a motorcycle without all the motorcycleness. It made riding easy, maybe too easy. The automatic transmission was smooth, sure, but it also made the bike feel more like an appliance than a machine. Cruiser fans used to the rumble and feel of a V-twin weren't impressed by the quiet, muted ride. And then there was the styling. With its stretched-out front, low profile, and future but not in a cool way look, the CTX-700 didn't turn heads. It tilted them in confusion. The ergonomics tried for comfort with a low seat and forward foot controls, but the riding position ended up feeling more awkward than ergonomic, especially on longer trips. To be fair, the CTX-700 nailed ease of use, but it also stripped out nearly everything that makes riding feel personal, visceral, and exciting. The result? A bike that appealed to almost nobody. Too bland for cruisers, too clunky for commuters, and too forgettable for everyone in between. From boring to just plain bizarre. Next up is a hybrid machine that had everyone asking, what is this supposed to be? Number 2. Honda DN01. The Honda DN01 looked like it was designed in a wind tunnel by someone who just watched Tron. A self-proclaimed hybrid of cruiser, sport bike, and the scooter, it aimed to be the motorcycle equivalent of a Swiss Army knife, but ended up more like a spork. Kind of useful, mostly confusing. At its core was a 680cc V-twin, pushing 61 horsepower and 47 ft of torque. Paired with Honda's human-friendly transmission, a CVT-style automatic, the DN01 was built to make riding as effortless as possible. No shifting, no clutch, just twist and go. But for a bike that looked like a sci-fi prototype, the actual ride felt more like a glorified mobility scooter. Styling-wise, it was bold. The sweeping panels, oversized front fairing, and low-slung seat screamed concept bike. But that boldness didn't translate to the street. Weighing 595 ohms, it was a handful in corners. And with limited lean angle, any attempt at sporty riding felt like pushing a refrigerator through an S-curve. The riding position didn't help either. Too forward for a cruiser, too relaxed for a sport bike. And with a price tag of $15,290, people expected either performance or premium comfort. The DN01 offered neither. Enthusiasts were turned off by the lack of manual control, and new riders were overwhelmed by the sheer weirdness of the whole package. In the end, the DN01's identity crisis was its undoing. It tried to be everything and ended up as a curiosity that nobody really knew what to do with. And speaking of bikes that left buyers scratching their heads, Number 1. Suzuki Boulevard C50. The Suzuki Boulevard C50 was supposed to be the friendly face of cruiser riding. Classic styling, decent power, and a manageable size. It was built to be your first taste of chrome-covered freedom. But while it checked all the boxes on paper, something got lost in the execution. At the center of the C50 is an 805cc air-cooled V-twin pushing 45 horsepower and 46 lb of torque. Paired with a 5-speed transmission and shaft drive, it promised simplicity and low maintenance. It even came with a low seat height, under 27 inches, to make sure new riders felt confident. Weighing 611 pounds, it had that big bike look without the intimidation factor. So far, so good. Until you actually tried to justify the $9,299 price tag. That's when things got murky. In a world where just a little more cash could land you a used Harley or a better spec'd cruiser with stronger brand cachet, the C50 started to look more like a budget compromise than a value pick. Styling was pure textbook cruiser, chrome, teardrop tank, stretched profile, but it lacked originality. It blended in at bike nights, but never stood out. And while it was comfortable enough for short rides, it didn't bring anything new or exciting to the table. The Boulevard C50 wasn't a bad bike. It just never gave riders a reason to choose it over flashier, more iconic options. It was the definition of fine. And in the crowded cruiser world, fine isn't enough to sell motorcycles. So what do you think? Were these bikes misunderstood genius? Or just proof that sometimes trying to reinvent the wheel makes it roll worse? Let us know in the comments. And if you've enjoyed this deep dive into Japan's most awkward two-wheeled experiments, give us a like and hit that subscribe button for more motorcycle breakdowns, hits, and misses.